Alright, you're hearing this, you're either lost, curious, or you stayed still long enough to listen. Wyoming's got a lot of cults. That's not new. What is new is how many of them are starting to agree with each other. The children of End, the fraction. They call themselves children, but they don't agree on a parent. Fractured groups follow something they call the last son. They're organized to organize. They move like a military pretending to be a prayer. They believe division is purity, but they're impatient about it. Impatience makes people dangerous. On Mother Isolde's children, these ones, different. They still believe in Adam, but they treat it like a journey, not a weapon. Mother Isolde, she teaches that mutation isn't punishment or proof, it's process. They don't rush the divide, they wait for it to mean something. The bright Pricklton, you'll know them by the glow that isn't radiation. They don't just worship change, they force it. Serum's light exposure, ritual mutation. They call it enlightenment. Most folks call it losing yourself. The Mothman cultists. 3 kinds from what I've seen. Holy ones. They watch quiet, respectful. They don't interfere unless something bigger is at stake. Wise ones, they talk, not always in words you understand, but there's intention there. Follow resurrects. Those don't worship, they feed. Glow faith congregations. Mutants who found meaning in the radiation instead of dying from it. They gather in hot zones, call it communion. They don't want to fight you, but they won't leave either, not even if the ground starts moving. The Master's remnants. These ones older than most problems still walking. They follow the idea of unity through mutation, not atom, not division. Unity. They think the world broke because it's split. They want to fix that. Closing thought. Here's the thing about all of them. They're not wrong because they believe something. They're dangerous because they believe it's the only thing. In Wyoming, faith ain't quiet anymore. It's moving. It's choosing sides. So if you're out there, don't just ask what people believe. Ask what they're willing to do about it. And I love that. Not every glow is warm. If you can hear the drums, you're already too close. Fractured children of outer militant branch. They don't wander, they don't debate, they don't wait. They advance. They follow something they call the last son of Adam. Not a teacher, not a prophet. A correction. They believe Adam's first division, the bombs, was incomplete. That the world didn't break enough. So now, they're finishing the job. You'll know them before you see them. 3 sounds. Metal voice silence. Metal, because everything they carry is built to last longer than you. Because they chant in unison, and they don't stop. Silence. Because when the chanting cuts, something is about to die. They don't send everyone at once. They send waves. First wave tests you, measures you, makes you show your hand. Second wave breaks what you thought was strong. Final wave doesn't fight. It ends things on their gifts. They don't just bring weapons, they bring answers. Creatures from below, things that don't belong to the surface. Not trained, not controlled, but directed. They believe these things are proof that Adam's will reaches deeper than we thought. I think they just found something that listens and doesn't care who called it. They don't break formation, they don't argue, they don't hesitate. That's not faith, nothing verbal. tells you to stop. Field advice. If you hear them coming, don't wait to confirm. Don't try to reason. Don't try to outlast them. Move. And if you can't move, make them pay for every step. Most cults want to change the world. These ones, they think the world already agreed. They're just here to enforce it. If you survive them, you won't forget the rhythm.
Not every glow burns. Wyoming children of Adamlander branch. They're not what you expect. On Mother is old. Mother is old runs them. She doesn't shout, doesn't march, doesn't threaten. She listens. I watched her sit with a scabber once. Man was scared of his own shadow, thought the radiation was already killing him. She didn't correct him. She just sat there and let him calm down. By the end, he was still scared. But he wasn't alone anymore. They still follow Adam. But not like the others. They don't chase the blast. They don't worship the bomb. They believe in the after. In the slow change, the quiet shift. The idea that the world didn't end. It just became something else. On Lander. Lander's different. Still broken, still dangerous. But there's order in it. They keep paths clear, share heat when they can mark safe routes with little glow lamps made from oat to heck and steady hand. You walk through there, you don't feel hunted. You feel watched, but not in a bad way. On mutation, they don't force it, they don't rush it. If someone changes, they help them understand it, teach them how to live with it. I saw a kid with glowing veins, couldn't stop shaking. They didn't call it a blessing, they didn't call it a curse. They called it the next step on their nature. They're kind. That doesn't mean they're weak. They'll defend their people, their ground, their belief, but they don't look for fights. They wait. And sometimes, waiting is stronger than swinging first on the coming storm.
They know what's coming.
The marching cults, the cold pulling in, the things under the ground shifting.
They don't deny it.
They prepare,
Not with walls.
with people.
Training, quiet plans, shared understanding.
They believe their champion will stand.
But they're not betting everything on one person.
They're betting on each other. In a place like Wyoming,
String and it's strange.
suspicious.
Even. But sometimes.
It's the only thing that hasn't been broken yet. If you find Lander, don't draw your weapon first. You might not need it.
If it looks like light, but feels like pressure,
Don't walk toward it. The bright cult, the bright brotherhood, they don't call themselves a cult. They call themselves enlightened. Most folks call them the bright cult, some say bright brotherhood. I've seen their work. I stick with danger. Their belief. They don't wait for change. They don't accept mutation. They force it. They believe the old world died because it was too slow to evolve. So they push hard. They think if you survive the change, you were meant to. And if you don't, you were part of the problem. Their methods, they take people, quiet if they can, violent if they have to, travelers, sellers, raiders who wander too far from their pack. I've heard stories from the edges of Thermopyla's caravans going missing, trails ending in light instead of blood. People think that's better. It isn't. Their process. They use old world tech, pre-war labs, things that were never meant to be used without oversight. Radiation exposure, chemical cocktails, light sources that shouldn't exist anymore. They don't test small. They go all in. I saw one of their successes. It was still breathing. That's all I'll say. Their presence in Wyoming. They don't hold territory like others. They drift. Set up in ruins with intact cystals, old hospitals, research bunkers, anywhere the lights can still turn on. Then they leave. Sometimes they take people with them. Sometimes they leave something behind. Either way, you don't want to find those places too late. Their minds, they're not mindless. They're focused, calm even. That's what makes it worse. They'll talk to you, explain things, tell you you're part of something bigger. They might even sound reasonable.
Don't mistake calm for kindness. Field advice. If you see unnatural light in a place that should be dark, leave. If someone offers you improvement, run. If you hear screaming that suddenly stops,
don't go looking. Closing thought. Some people worship the past. Some worship what came after. The bright cult. They worship what could be without asking if it should. Not every light is meant to guide you.
if you feel watched, don't panic. Just don't lie. The Mothmen of Wyoming, they're not myths. They're not just creatures. They're something between. A bloodshed, stories, sightings, warnings. Wyoming. Wyoming has presence. They don't always show themselves, but they're there, watching, waiting. The holy moth, red eyes. These are the ones people call blessed. Red-eyed, bright, steady. They appear before something happens. Storms, collapses, attacks. Not to stop it, to witness it. Some cultists follow them like angels. They pray, they kneel, they listen. And sometimes they survive things they shouldn't. The wise one, purple eyes. These don't show up for crowds. They show up for individuals. Purple glow, softer, harder to look at directly. They don't speak in words, but people come back changed, not twisted like the bright cult's work.
focused, like they've been given a direction. Problem is, you don't know whose direction it is. Razorback, gold-eyed ones, those aren't worshipped. They're feared. Razorbacks don't watch. They hunt. No warning, no pattern, no mercy. I've seen what's left after one passes through a camp. There's nothing left to bury. They don't care about your belief. They don't care about your purpose. They don't even care if you see them coming. On the cultists, there are people who follow each type. Lowly followers, quiet, reverent, patient. Wise followers, strange, distant, like they're listening to something you can't hear. And Razorback followers, those aren't followers. They're leftovers. People who got too close and didn't come back right. Their role in Wyoming, they don't claim land. They don't build towns. They move along the edgings. But lately, they've been moving inward, toward Lander, toward the noise, the war, the faith, toward something waking up. Field advice: if you see red eyes, stay calm. And if you see purple, be careful what you think about. If you see gold, it's already too late. Closing thought: they're not gods. They're not saviors. They're not monsters either. There's something older than the way we name things. Out here, you don't worship them. You coexist. If they let you. And if something tells you the mods love you, start running.
Some splits are loud. Some splits happen so slow. You don't notice until you're already standing on different sides. What they used to be. There was a time, not that long ago, when glow faith congregations and the Master's remnants weren't separate. They believed in the same thing. That the old world was weak, and radiation was the next step. Not a curse, a correction. They gathered in hot zones, shared space, shared ideas. Mutant survivors, people who didn't die when they were supposed to. They thought that meant something. Glow faith congregations. Glow faith stayed with the feeling. They believe radiation is holy, not because it destroys, because it changes. They gather in irradiated places like it's church, stand in the glow, let it wash over them. Some pray, some just sit. I've seen them welcome strangers, offer water, offer shelter. They don't push belief. They just exist in it. Strange thing, most of them are at peace. The Master's remnants, the remnants went a different way. They don't just believe in mutation, they believe in unity through it. One mind, one purpose, no division,
no chaos. They follow the idea of the master, not the man himself, but what he tried to build. They think the world broke because it became too many things. They want to fix that. Make everything the same. The split. They didn't fight when they split. No war, no big moment. Just disagreement. Glowface said, let people change on their own. Remnant said, that's too slow. Glowface said, radiation is a gift. Remnant said, it's a tool. And that was enough. Their presence in Wyoming. Glowface stays near stable radiation. Old reactors, fallout zones, places the cold doesn't reach as hard. They don't move much. They don't need to. The remnants, they move, quiet hepushe, looking for people who can be improved. They don't ask twice, field advice. If you find Glowface, don't panic. They might help you. If you find the remnants, don't argue. They've already decided what you are. Closing thought. Both groups started with the same idea, that the world needed to change. One chose to let it happen. The other chose to make it happen. In Wyoming. That difference matters more than you think. Because one will wait for you to understand, and the other won't wait at all.